Hello, I'm Holly Tanner with the Herman and Wallace Pelvic Rehab Institute, and I'm here with Dustienne Miller, who is a longtime faculty member and who teaches in the course series for us, and also has had a course for a long time called Yoga for Pelvic Pain. Hi, Dustienne. It's great to see you, and it would be fantastic if you would tell folks a little bit about yourself and about what kind of professional activities you've been involved in and that type of thing.
Sure, sure. Well, I'm so thrilled to be here because I get to first see you, who I've known for many years, Holly, and also to get to talk about two things that are very important to me in my life, which is pelvic health and yoga and the synthesis of those two. My journey into yoga was first as a dancer and needing a way to help support flexibility, strength, and balance. And then through a yoga practice, I dove deeper into the philosophies and the meditation and the mindfulness and all of that I found really supportive for what then at that point in my life became some anxiety that was kind of challenging to deal with. And then my evolution in my yoga journey included using it in my clinical practice in pelvic health. So that was probably about maybe 15, 20 years ago, maybe at this point. And then you and I were having a conversation at, oh, I don't know where it was, but at some point about developing my interest in pelvic health and yoga. And I either had my yoga videos at that point or I was just having filmed them. I don't think they were out, but you were kind of coaching me on how to create a course for this, which I then started with Herman and Wallace in 2012, I think it was. And of course, there have been several rewrites, and the course has evolved as my practice has evolved, and the research has totally shown up. When I first wrote the course, all of the yoga research was on comorbidities and other diagnoses that are associated with pelvic health. So back pain, fibromyalgia, and now we're seeing research in IC. I've actually recently been involved with a study for yoga for IC. We're seeing research on endo, and it's really exciting to see how things have changed and the embracing of a modality that is so therapeutic
Mhm.
by
Well,
everybody.
that's wonderful. And how did you get
Yeah.
into pelvic health itself?
Oh, well, another faculty member, Stacy Futterman. So I was working at the same clinic, which is H&D Physical Therapy in New York. This was probably 2008, maybe, in that pocket. And she came in, I was treating just ortho, and she came into our clinic and said um, some words about how pelvic health was one of the major reasons why folks went into nursing homes with incontinence, and that pain with sex was something that a lot of cis women had issues with, like 1 in 4. And I had never heard of this before because, when we were in PT school, there was no pelvic health program or lecture or anything. So I found that to be super interesting. And the feminist in me was like, I have to learn about this. So then I talked to Stacy after and I got interested in that. And luckily, I was at a place where I could start the program in that clinic, but then she was the head of the program. So I was able to get mentorship and help and able to start up on the Upper East Side. Yeah,
Wonderful.
so
Well, so
fun.
what kind of things do you cover in the course? What can people expect to learn? Are they doing some movement? Are they learning how to teach folks some yoga applications? Is it a pretty deep dive into the literature? Or is it divided into different categories? Like how's it set up?
Yeah. Yeah. So I would say that it's pretty experiential in that we do a lot of different yoga postures. We talk about what could be contraindications for different types of conditions or what you would see clinically. Let's say someone has some adverse tension going into flexion, how you could modify that. If someone is post-surgical, how you can modify that. If someone's pregnant, etc. So we break down 8 major postures. And as I tell people in the class, this is not a protocol. This is not like if you do these postures and you have endometriosis, you will automatically get pain relief. It's just a strategy that one could apply. And like all things, we need to assess where does a person have some functional limitations? How can we use these postures therapeutically to support that? And in addition to postures, it would be warm up and breath work. And as you know, breath work is super important, super helpful in terms of tying in to neuroscience. So we spend some time talking about neuroscience. We talk about, of course, the evidence behind any sort of therapeutic yoga application, and go through 4 different labs of yoga postures in a flow so people can experience how their body feels from a mindfulness perspective when they start, and then throughout. And then through the flow, we cue the pelvic floor, we cue things like lateral rib cage, checking in that we're not doing apical breathing, and we're not holding rigidity there. Grounding, which I think more than ever we all need to feel that sense of no
Mm.
matter where we are in our day. We'll do that, and we weave that into the course, and then we do some breath work as well, specifically like a section about that, and then the anatomy behind breathing, the anatomy behind the yoga postures,
Don't
and
you sometimes
some
feel like
teaching.
yoga is the original rehabilitation?
Yes, I do, because you brought that up to me in whatever year it was, 2010, we'll say, and I thought that is so smart because you said that the whole point of having the asana, the physical posture part, which is one of the 8 limbs of yoga, that in the course we talk mostly about the two limbs that I bring into it would be posture and breathing. But you said that maybe this was the original rehab tool because people had to be able to prepare to sit for meditation, and
Yeah.
it's
Well, and
still
that's
in my
something that
course. So this,
sure, and that's something that Yogananda teaches in reference to Kriya Yoga, right? That in order to sit for such a long time in these meditative postures, a lot of these practitioners would go through these different, physical movements
yeah,
and all of that in order to, to be able to do that. So I think that's fascinating. Um,
yeah,
and
yeah.
also just simply so many of the components of rehab that we hang our hats on, right? Like breathing. And even when we talk about pelvic floor dysfunction, or again, all the diaphragms, and you look at some of the bandhas, right? And you
Mhm.
know, with breath work, one of the things that a lot of people often will talk about is like ujjayi breath, and how when they have pain and tension in the pelvic floor, how sometimes that's impactful. Do you have some insight about that in terms of how that gets looked at in the course? And also, I think didn't you bring a friend to help talk about?
I did. Let's give her a big grand entrance. She's going to fly in from the top.
Oh,
My friend
nice.
Penelope. Yes. The piece about Ujjayi, I would say it depends on the person and how they're doing it. Just like breathing, that from for my body, if I cue myself to take a deep breath, I'm allowing my belly to fill. But as we know, some of our patients might actually pressurize and push out, in which case I would choose to cue the person, can you take a slow secret breath? So we're just like sort of filling versus pressurizing.
Mm,
Same thing for Ujjayi breathing. Is the person creating the sound at the glottis by over activating the accessory muscles? Are they actually creating tension in the jaw?
mm.
Or is it a supportive breath for them? So if I'm thinking through what type of a breath would be supportive for this person, it is going to be dependent, just like our home exercises are. But the theory behind why Ujjayi breath could be really helpful is if we're thinking about, like you said, the diaphragm, pelvic diaphragm, respiratory diaphragm, and then all of the horizontal fibers up at the glottis. If we're creating some pressure here, especially for folks that are having a harder time creating pressure here, that could help with creating this sense of slowing the breath down, getting the nervous system to go more parasympathetic. And then, as we know, that helps with heart rate variability and also just pain control potentially. Having a strategy to focus on that is not the pain, that is helpful too. There was a study, I will not be able to quote who did it, but I have read it, that talks about the difference between folks who have studied yoga and meditation and people who didn't. And they did a cold pressor test. And they found that the strategies that the people who were the non practitioners used were things like distraction, versus the yoga and the meditator groups used mindfulness and different strategies that created different results.
So
So
yeah, so understanding yoga can actually provide someone with more tools and approaches.
that's exactly it. And I can tell you this is not pelvic health related, but I had a disc injury last year and riding the subway and the bus was brutal. Every micro movement was like, I can't. And going to my breath saved me. And it may not have decreased my pain, but it kept me from losing my mind for that 20 minutes
Mhm,
and crying
mhm,
basically. So just having another strategy. And that's what we do is we give people strategies, we give people ideas. Does this stick? Does this make sense for you? And if my patients don't like yoga, then I'm like, great, that is super clear. We're not going to even talk about it anymore. What are you into? How can I help support you in a way that's meaningful for you?
mm. In
Yeah.
addition to your love of yoga and physical therapy and pelvic health, you have another love and you've been able to express that professionally. Can you tell folks a little bit
Yes.
about that?
Yes, I would love to. So I went to physical therapy school right out of high school. And then I decided I was rewarding myself with a summer program at Alvin Ailey School, the dance school. And I did that and I thought that would get dance out of my system. And apparently it didn't, because then a year later, I found myself in New York and I decided that I was just going to be a dancer and not do physical therapy. So that was the first half of my career was in the dance world, specifically in theater dance. And so then when I got back into physical therapy, I was able to connect with Jen Green at Physio Arts, who does Broadway show coverage and coverage for Radio City. So I got to do physical therapy backstage there. And it was around the same time that I was getting into pelvic health. And of course, as you know, dancers and gymnasts and Pilates teachers also can tend to have more tight pelvic floors. So during that time, I wasn't doing pelvic health in those settings, but I would talk to friends, be like, "Oh, is this a thing for you?" And kind of crowdsourcing in a way, like how many people actually have some tight pelvic
Sure.
floors that are either asymptomatic or showing up as abdominal pain or showing up as dysmenorrhea or other things. But yeah, so now I teach over at Boston Conservatory, which is a school over here in Boston, obviously. But it's a conservatory training, so I still get to do my musical theater, jazz, dance classes,
That's
which is
excellent.
so fun. And then tell them about the pelvic floor. Tell them how to use their core and how to manage pressures as dancers.
You
So
bet.
that's
And you
pretty
know
cool.
what I think is also so important is the work that we do in pelvic health is very intensive when we're talking with patients about such intimate things, and especially folks who have pelvic pain and that chronic pain experience, as well as often trauma histories, right?
Mhm.
And so I think it's inspiring that you've taken a piece of your life that you said, I don't want to let this thread go. I love it. And you've
Yeah.
integrated, of course, into your day-to-day practice, but also into your career and into your life. So I think that's a really important message that you don't have to say it's one or the other. You can look at your life and create some flexibility in whatever way is needed to make sure
Mhm.
that we're doing those things that just light us up inside, you know?
Yeah, I really feel like that feeds me to be present for my patients because I'm getting fed from these beautiful artists on
Mhm.
the other end of my life. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I kind of giggled when you mentioned trauma, which seems a weird thing to say, but I think about how much I'm such a different teacher now because I'm so trauma aware from the pelvic health work that I'm is it okay if I touch your hand? I would never have said that before.
Yeah.
So it's interesting how the worlds feed each other. Another big thing that I have noticed is that when you're doing a turn, a pirouette, in order to be balanced, you need to have ribs over pelvis. But now I explain the reason why is because your diaphragm is over your pelvic floor. Your pelvic floor is going to help co-coordinate all this core strength for you, and I'll explain that. And it makes sense, for them to
Excellent.
know because they're singers too.
Right.
Yeah,
Right. You know,
yeah,
you've taught this course for a long time, and you'd mentioned that, you kind of constantly, update it and integrate
yeah.
and modify it. What
Yeah.
kind of feedback do you get from participants who have taken the course and then circle back and see you or connect with you? Like, what are they saying about how it actually shows up in the clinic for them?
That's great. So I'm a Virgo, as you know. So when I developed the course, it was very important to me that there would be actionable steps that people could integrate right away versus having this embodied experience and then saying, I don't really know how to apply this. So I do have a section which is if you're looking to integrate, let's say someone said, you say, how much time do you have in your home for a home program? They say 5 minutes. Great. This is an example of something I could have someone try for a 5 minute program. This is an example of something that would be a 2 minute program. And again, it's not protocol based, but it's just a way of laying out these are ideas you could try. If someone has tailbone pain, these are some things you could try. Again, not a protocol, but this is where you could start and then from there decide to grow.
Mhm.
So I think that's been helpful. That's some feedback I've received that they were able to then go back in with the manual into the clinic and then say, okay, today I'm going to try this with this patient. Or they could say, today I'm going to try to do a spinal mobility exercise with breath for each person I see. And that's going to show up differently. It might be standing, it could be laying down, it could be seated. And then at the end of the course, they do a student teach, which actually works over Zoom because we have figured out how to do everything over Zoom. And
Yes.
it's fun because I just pop into the Zoom rooms and see how people do. And they could bring a patient, bring a patient, meaning it's written down. The patient isn't coming into the space, but they could bring for problem solving a patient case, which they could then bring into the clinic, or they could problem solve for themselves if they're having some challenges that they're working through as well.
Wonderful. Well, is
Yeah.
there anything else you would like folks to know about the course? And
Oh,
no?
I think that if anyone ever has a question, if it's right for them, I'm so happy to entertain that question and tell them a little bit more in depth what the class is. It's always really important to me that people get out of it what they're looking for.
Mm.
We always have a very broad range of people who've never taken yoga before, people who are certified yoga teachers that are also physios or other professionals. We have OTs, we have nurse practitioners, we have midwives, we have a bunch of different backgrounds, which is really fun too. So yeah, I'm always happy to chat, schedule a phone call with anyone who wants to hear more about it. And unlike the PF series, people who are yoga teachers and not rehab certified are able to take the course. I just ask that they talk to me so I make sure it's a good fit, that they know what material will be presented, so they'll be happy with what they experience.
Wonderful. And how can folks get in
Yeah.
touch with you? Go to your
Yes.
business website?
Email is good because I can write back at any hour.
Mhm.
The easiest is probably info at your pace yoga. That would be the easiest one. I am on social, but I think email's probably a little more reliable for me to see a message and get back.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, thank you
Thank
so
you.
much for taking time to
Thank you,
tell folks about
Holly.
your course. And
Yeah.
it's always been popular, and I know it's going to be around for a long time. So thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure to teach. It's been really helpful to me to know that people are having additional strategies that also might help support them. And that's one thing
Mm.
I say in the course is we're heading into this course, we're heading into a weekend. You just worked all week. You're probably going back to work Monday. You're probably having stuff at home. Try to find the space in this course to really let yourself down train and notice what happens when you check in at the beginning of the flow and when you check in at the end of the flow and in the middle too. But my goal is that it's restorative and restful for them, as well as learning some things and feeling really more embodied by the end of the weekend. So
Wonderful.
thank you. Thank you for letting me chat about it. And always a pleasure to see you too.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.